Hello, everyone in podcast land. On this week's episode, we talk about our thoughts on WWDC 2022.
We talk about the future of Nothing Company and their announcement of their brand new phone coming soon. And we talk about the European Union deciding that all devices should be using USB-C by 2024.
Okay, topic number one, WWDC happened this week. It's Apple's annual developer conference. Usually there's a lot of software revealed. There isn't always hardware revealed. Now, our last podcast, we were talking about, AR headsets from Sony, possibly from Apple, possibly. The Sony State of Play happened. No VR headset. They talked a little bit about VR games. They mentioned a few VR games. Apple's developer conference happened. No mention at all about VR or AR. So, kind of got our hopes up for nothing. But there was still some interesting stuff. I mean, they always announce the newest iOS update. So iOS 16 was announced. There's some updates to Apple CarPlay. Another thing they announced was a new M2 chip. So they've got, M1, M1 Pro, M1 Ultra, M1 Max. Now they're on to M2. So the second generation of their Apple Silicon chips, along with new M2 chips. There's new devices to put them in. So we got an M2 MacBook Air, which has a new redesign. We got an old designed 13-inch MacBook Pro with a touch bar and everything. That also got the M2 chip. They announced their new Mac operating system, Ventura. They announced a new iPad OS 16, some updates there. So those were the main things that were announced. We'll start off with hardware, right? M2 chip. They're saying, 25% more transistors compared to the M1, 50% more memory bandwidth, supports, 50% more unified memory, more RAM. The CPU performance is 20% higher, GPU performance 30% higher. And of course, they have all the graphs, all the ambiguous, nonsensical graphs that they like to throw all over the place. But the most meaningful thing about this new chip is that instead of comparing to their old Intel MacBooks, which were, it's 200% better than this, now we're seeing, okay, this is comparing the new Apple Silicon chip to the old Apple Silicon chip. So we can we can get an idea of at what rate they're going to be improving things. So, it's a decent improvement, decent upgrade. If you're someone who just got an M1 powered device, you definitely do not need to upgrade. You're not going to see, the improvements I mentioned. Yeah, they're meaningful, but not enough to upgrade from a device you just got.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing we're seeing too is, okay, this was a 2-year transition that they said they were going to take. So it's 2 years from when they unveiled the first M1 chip. So I think it's also good to see that, hey, we're not getting, a rapid year after year after year, update or upgrade to the chips. It's a 2-year cycle. That's fairly reasonable. You can see they're not rushing things out of the door. So we're getting, I guess, more meaningful improvements. But yeah, I was a little bit surprised to see the M2 chip, I guess mainly because there was all this talk about VR this and AR that. And also surprisingly, we still haven't heard anything more about the Mac Pro. They, in their last event that they had, they said, hey, we still have one more device that we're going to bring Apple Silicon to, and that's the Mac Pro. And I'm kind of surprised we didn't even hear anything about this. Not even okay, you might have been expecting it, but at our next event, we're going to give you Mac Pro. And it also kind of has me wondering if they've already started with M2, what kind of chip are we going to get in the Mac Pro? Is it going to be an M1 Ultra, or are they going to have some sort of M2 variant ready for whenever they unveil this thing? But, all that being said, what are your thoughts on WWDC? Were you surprised by some things? Are there some things that impress you, or what's your general temperature on the event?
Yeah, so my general temperature is warm. Um, there are stuff that was kind of cool, but I feel like for every good announcement, there was also answers to questions that we were asking of what the future of MacBooks and stuff like that would look like, and even iPads. And the answers weren't always exactly what I personally would have wanted as someone who is generally like an Android PC user. But I imagine for people who are in the Apple ecosystem, they might have not had the same issues as I did. But I think you brought up a good point there about the Mac Pro. WWDC seems like it would have been the perfect venue to talk about the Mac Pro because it's going to be a professional machine. It's probably the audience that they're talking to at that event would be the audience that would be most interested in that machine. But if this is them trying to focus development on Apple Silicon and talking about all these new features in terms of, for example, with M2, the advancements from, they're saying, hey, in some aspects it's 30% faster than M1 or 33% faster than M1. And, it's got a higher bandwidth for memory and a little bit more memory, going from 16 gigabytes up to 24 gigabytes on the base M2, and going up to 100 megabytes per second in terms of memory bandwidth for unified memory. So that's both GPU and CPU memory, which is a something that they probably want developers to start to incorporate into their app so that they can be more performant on M2 as opposed to M1, which is great. That's fine. But like you said, this is 2 years. This is close to 2 years after the original M1. Uh, is that a huge jump? No, not really. But it also is a sign that they're sticking with the fact that they want these things to last a long time on battery life, and M1 was already pretty good to begin with. I think where it's going to grow going forward isn't going to be in, the same kind of spec bumps that we saw when they were comparing it to processors from 2019 or 2015 or something like that. It's going to be a lot less dramatic going forward, which is what Intel was going through, right? And AMD is going through right now. When you're changing chips out every year, every couple of years, there isn't a huge uh, gain in terms of performance that you're going to see. But over time, because most people don't upgrade their laptops every year, you're going to start to see a significant increase if you change out your laptop 5, 6, 7 years down the road.
Mm.
But when it comes to the products, I think the MacBook Air is cool looking. I think it's one of the cooler looking devices that Apple has made. I definitely like the design even more than the redesigned MacBook Pros that they showed later last year. But like I said, they answered some questions that I don't particularly like the answers to. Like, for example, we talked on the podcast in the past. We hoped, or at least I hoped, that there wouldn't be this idea that only pros get things like USB ports and HDMI ports.
Mm.
And not only are they saying, not only do only pros get it, but only specific pros, because the base level MacBook Pro, the 13-inch one, is the exact same machine as it was last year, but with an M2 in it. So it doesn't have MagSafe. It doesn't have any HDMI ports or anything like that. It still has the touch bar. So I find that interesting that this is supposed to be a pro machine and all it is a MacBook Air with a fan, uh,
Mm.
which is a little bit disappointing. But then also, we don't see a Mac Mini with an M2. And on top of that, they're continuing to sell the M1 MacBook Air, which means that this new M2 MacBook Air isn't replacing that machine. It's just a more expensive version of it. So
And
it kind of
$200 more expensive.
$200 more expensive. And then the MacBook Pro that, is still the old MacBook Pro, but with an M2 chip in it is $100 more than that. And you get a fan. So it's and potentially even a worse screen. I think the brightness of the screen is 100 nits lower than the MacBook Air. So it's just a weird lineup, a very odd lineup.
Mm-hmm.
But Apple is no stranger to very odd lineups. And I imagine that the MacBook Air with the M1 is probably going to stick around for a long time. It's going to be that entry level machine. But eventually it's going to be that machine that Apple sells that no one should really buy, kind of like what they were doing with the old MacBook Airs. There were years where the MacBook Air was using a chip that was 5 years older than what their current machines were using because they just never updated it. But they were selling it because it was the most affordable option on their lineup, and people would buy it, or they would use that as a way to get people into the store and then upsell them on something else. And I think that's what's going to happen with this lineup. Someone's going to see a
Hmm.
MacBook Air and it's the old design, and then they're going to see the new MacBook Air and it's the new design, and then they're going to see a MacBook Pro, which is $100 more, but potentially worse or potentially better in some ways. So it's like there's such a small variation between each machine, but an easy way to upsell you 100 or 200 or $300 more, uh, just to get that little bit of extra cash out of the customers. But I don't think this lineup is particularly customer friendly. I don't know. I overall I thought this stuff was interesting. I think like I said, I think the new MacBook Air looks really cool, but the fact that it doesn't have um, the port selection that you would expect from the MacBook Pros, and it has a notched screen, and it's also
Hmm.
$200 more than last year's. Little bit disappointing. And then finally, what I'll end off is with iPad. We talk so much about how the iPad Pro could potentially be the best device that Apple makes in terms of price and what you're getting for the price, but multitasking has been a huge issue. What they're doing with the new Mac OS and the new iPad OS in terms of multitasking, for me, is kind of dumb. So what they're having is essentially all your open apps will sit in this little carousel beside what your current window is showing, so that you can easily switch between the two, and then or between all those apps, and then they'll also have the ability to bring up sets of windows that you can move around and stuff like that. But to me, that's weirdly restrictive. Like, why not just have regular taskbars and windows and stuff like that, so I can just jump between windows whenever I want, as opposed to having this and
Hmm.
be full screen whenever I want. Like, I don't know, it's just weird. But then again, I'm not a Mac user. I know full screen apps on Macs isn't as useful as a thing or as used as it would be on Windows. So maybe that's just my Windows methodology coming into play, and not really liking the way I've never liked the way Macs have dealt with window management. But that's just my perspective. I'm curious, how do you feel about the lineup? Do you think the new MacBook Air does enough to be $200 more? Are you disappointed that the old one is still there? And how do you feel about the window management that they're talking about with both Mac OS and also with iPad OS? Do you think that's enough for iPads to be the go-to machine in terms of multitasking?
So I'll kind of talk about things in the backwards order that you did.
Mm.
And also, so I'll mention Watch OS for
Oh
their
yeah.
Apple Watches. They got an update. It may seem kind of like trivial to some people, but to me is a very big deal.
Mm.
So they added heart rate zones for workouts. They would tell you your heart rate. They wouldn't really tell you what zones you're in. If you're familiar with heart rate zones, then you kind of have an idea already. But they have like I guess, a visual representation of what zone you're in. Cool. The more more important thing for me is they finally have detailed sleep tracking.
Mm.
Apple Watches, you could wear them to sleep. They would tell you, okay, this was like your heart rate. This is, they gave you some things, but for such a high tech device with so many sensors, the fact that they wouldn't have detailed sleep tracking in terms of, what your heart rate was throughout the night, what in terms of your activity, were you in REM sleep, were you in deep sleep, were you in light sleep? The fact that they didn't have that built into it completely boggled my mind. And I still use a Fitbit just to wear to sleep because it has detailed sleep stages and sleep tracking. The fact that now I finally can do that with my Apple Watch, it's a bit overdue, but that's one of the things that I'm more excited about, very personal to me. Now for the iPad. So the feature that you're talking about is, they call it Stage Manager because they have to have a fancy branded name for everything that they do. I am glad to see it, but I'm a little apprehensive. I mean, I'll need to test it out to see how well it works. I'm somewhat used to multitasking on an iPad right now. I've
Mm.
used it for long enough. I definitely wish there was more you could do with it, and I'm excited to see that they're expanding what you can do with uh, apps with multitasking on an iPad. Right now, you can have two apps, split the screen, and you can kind of have a third app off to the side. It's a little weird, but it works. But really, you can only have two apps running at once, really. The fact that now you can have multiple apps, you can have up to 4 apps on the screen at a time. You can resize the windows. Now they have a weird thing where they're kind of overlapping. You can't have, or at least from what I've seen from the demo, you can't have 3 apps all on the screen at the same time and you're working on all 3 of them. We'll see once I actually get to using it what it's like. But this is definitely, I think at least, this is a iPad feature first that this, okay, and we'll put it on the Mac too, maybe to get people more familiar with it, to make it easier to switch between iPad and Macs, maybe to make that switch a little bit easier in terms of your workflows back and forth. But I think this is definitely designed for iPad first. So I'm glad to see that they're expanding the capabilities of iPads because they're, as we've said time and time again, as everyone has said, they're being hamstrung by their software.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll see how useful it is once it's actually, I guess, once it can actually be implemented. And then the MacBooks. So I like the M2 MacBook. I like the redesign. I like it a lot, actually. And I'm actually fine with there only being the 2 ports on the side, especially because they brought MagSafe to this.
Mm-hmm.
With the old MacBook Air, with the, I guess, old, still sort of new 13-inch MacBook Pro, there's only 2 ports on the side. And if you were charging your device, then you only had 1 port to do things with. With this new MacBook Air, they brought MagSafe, 2 Thunderbolt ports on the side, and a high impedance audio jack also on the other side. Because this is, their supposedly entry level, or, not fully entry level, but this is their entry level device. I'm fine with there only being 2 Thunderbolt ports,
Mm-hmm.
especially because if, the way laptops are now, if you've been in the Apple ecosystem for a while, you probably have a dongle situation set up already. So it's not okay. You're not completely throwing your dongles out. You still have a use for them, whether you're in the Apple ecosystem or you're from another laptop that only has USB-C ports, right? And you would have a dongle from that already. I like it's more of a boxy shape. It's not a wedge shape anymore, like the MacBook Pros, the 14 and 16-inch. The notch, I don't like. I really don't get it. It's stupid, but I guess they've already committed to adding in a notch to devices. So I guess that's the one thing I don't like about the MacBook Air in
Mm-hmm.
terms of the redesign, but the price. I guess the price is the thing that kind of gets to me the most. I'm glad that they still have the M1 MacBook Air available. $999 US. It's a good entry level price. But what I would have liked to see is them drop the price of that device because now it's a 2-year-old device, right? I would have liked to see them drop the price of that and then bring in the M2 MacBook Air at a lower price. Now, does it need to be $999? Okay, you could say there's a lot of R&D that went into the development. There's a lot of new features we're adding. We have to bump up the price from $999. Okay, but I would say the M1 MacBook Air maybe drop it to $899. The M2 MacBook Air maybe $1099. That's more reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
This thing is coming in at pretty much $1,200, which for your entry level, for your MacBook Air, that's your entry level device. Even though there's a cheaper version, the MacBook Air should be your entry level device. $1,200 is a bit steep. I mean, $999 is a bit steep, but less steep. But in terms of this device, okay, we get new colors or 4 colors. Everyone was speculating before, oh, there's going to be orange and purple and blue. There's going to be all these colors to match iMacs. Didn't happen. It's a thin device. You get a MagSafe port, 2 Thunderbolt ports, the high impedance audio jack, like I mentioned, a full size function row. Like, thankfully, they didn't. I don't know why they would bring the touch bar to this device, but thankfully they didn't. It has Touch ID. It has a new quad speaker setup, a new microphone setup, a larger 13.6-inch screen. So it's actually a bigger screen than the MacBook Pro, the 13-inch MacBook Pro,
Mm-hmm.
and a better webcam. So when you compare this new M2 MacBook Air to the M2 MacBook Pro, it really doesn't make any sense. This is sort of like, you mentioned they have strange lineups. this reminds me very much of the iPad Air. When you compare the iPad Air to the 11-inch iPad Pro, it really didn't make any sense to get the iPad Pro because the iPad Air, especially once they put M1 in it, had everything that the iPad Pro had to offer, except for okay, a slightly worse screen and you lose a camera. But who's really using the cameras on their iPads?
Mm-hmm.
So I think you brought up a good point. This device is it's put their devices are put in such a way that okay, maybe you go into the store thinking I'm gonna get the 999 MacBook Air. But then you see, okay, hey, for $200 more, I can get better performance, a newer design, they get MagSafe, and it's 2 years newer. So theoretically, it'll last at least 2 years longer. So I think it's an easy upsell to the newer MacBook Air. Possibly you could upsell someone from a MacBook Air to the 13-inch MacBook Pro with M2 in it, but I really think I really think it's just to move more units of the MacBook Air.
Yeah.
And maybe you're someone who's going in for a MacBook Pro and then you see, oh wait, these devices are very similar. And I think actually if you spec them out the same, I think the only reason the MacBook Air, the newer one, is cheaper is because it has less memory. It either has less memory or less storage, and then if you spec it the same, they cost the same price.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, okay, do you want to pay for a new design or do you want to pay for the use of a fan? And I'm sure most people are going to choose the newer design. It looks a lot better. So yeah, I really think they have their devices priced in such a way to encourage people to buy the M2 MacBook Air. And I was also surprised that they didn't have this new M2 chip inside of a Mac Mini.
Yeah.
I was expecting a Mac Mini just like you because when they debuted the M1 chip, it was the MacBook Air, MacBook Pro, Mac Mini. Maybe they're also redesigning the Mac Mini and it just didn't work out to reveal it at this point. But I guess that's what I'm most interested in seeing, how this performs the Mac Mini. And I guess maybe what changes they bring to the Mac Mini. But I mean, overall, it was a very long event, but it was a good event. I like the software updates they had. I like the M2 chip. I like the MacBook Air. 13-inch MacBook Pro's stupid. They should just get rid of it. But
Yeah.
overall, it was I think a positive event for Apple.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right there. And as much as I may have like some trepidation on the MacBook Air, it's still the device I would get personally, even at the higher price. I think you're right. It looks really, really cool. Got a good screen. You have two usable ports now because you can charge via MagSafe. That's just awesome. And also to go back to the iPad, another cool thing that they added is finally, this is kind of like what you were saying with the Apple Watch and sleep tracking. Finally, they added full external display support, um,
Yes.
which is so. Before, what it used to do is it just used to mirror your display. So if you're using a 16:9 display, it would have the same aspect ratio as the iPad on that 16:9 display, just showing exactly what you were showing before. But now you get almost like a full-on desktop view of an extended display. It takes up the whole screen now, and you can have. They're saying you can have four windows with this new kind of mode that they're using on the iPad.
Stage manager.
Stage manager. Yes, sorry, I'm bad with the Apple terminology. And then also another four on the external display. So I think this is getting closer and closer to an iPad being a full-on laptop replacement, which I think they're slowly getting there. But the more they do with iPad OS, I wish they would happen a little bit faster. But the more they do, I think you're 100% right. It should be, iPad Air, or sorry, MacBook Air, and iPads. I think should be the machines that they sell for like entry level, and then you get into the actual MacBook Pros, not this weird M2 with a fan thing that they're doing right now. But yeah, I think their lineup is growing to being really cool. There's just a couple of devices there that don't make sense, like the old MacBook Air, which right now is still makes sense, but I think if they keep it there for another couple years, it's going to be ridiculous, and it's something that they're going to need to update or replace or move the current iPad Air down. But yeah, I agree. I think a lot of what they've talked about is really cool to see. And there's going to be more events this year, so maybe we do get to see an updated Mac Mini that will probably be more expensive, but with an M2 chip, and also the Mac Pro later, maybe even an M2 Pro and an M2 Max. So yeah, it's interesting. It's always exciting to see what they're gonna do next, because I think the way they release these things, like you said, is at a good rate where it never feels like you're waiting, or you're waiting too long to see a new product from Apple, which is really cool to see.
Okay, on to topic number two. Nothing, the phone company from Carl Pei, has officially sent out emails and invites to their launch event for their debut phone on Tuesday, July 12th at 1600 BST, which is 11 a.m. Eastern Time. There's been a lot of, I guess, buzz in the news. There's been a lot of rumors. They had an event where they announced that they were officially working on the phone after everyone already knew they were working on the phone. But now it's confirmed. Okay, July 12th, they're going to have the launch event for their phone. Now, this is the company's second device, and it's going to be their debut phone, their very first phone. The event is branded as nothing, parentheses, event, uh, colon, return to instinct. So there's not, I guess, nothing concrete, or not too many things are concrete about this phone, right? We know it's going to feature a transparent design, sort of like the Nothing Ear one that they launched. There's going to be illuminating light strips on the back of the device. It's going to be powered by a Qualcomm Snapdragon. It's going to be running Android. But other than that, there isn't, there isn't too much information about the phone, which I'm sure is part of the mystique, the appeal that Carl Pay's trying to create. There's a lot of hype about it. They, in all their marketing and all their press stuff, they talk about changing the industry. But I'm wondering, what are they going to do? What can they even do to really shake up the industry like that? Okay, transparent design is cool, but that doesn't really change the industry to say, oh, we're making our phones see through. What features are they going to bring? Are they going to change the industry with the pricing, or is it going to be more of a repairability way of changing the industry, like we've seen from Framework, like we've seen from Steam Deck? So I don't know. I'm looking forward to seeing the phone, to finally seeing the phone after all of these years of hype. But I'm wondering, is it just going to be okay? There's a lot of posturing, a lot of talk in the news or talk in the press, or they put out all these promotional things about it, but at the end of the day it's just another Android phone. So I guess my question to you, are you excited about the event? Do you think they're going to change the industry, or do you think they can change the industry?
I mean, I don't want to sound negative, but I'm not super excited about the event. Like, I have a small amount of excitement, the same amount of excitement I would have if Samsung is going to talk about a phone or anything like that. No more. Um, but I also don't think there's going to be a huge change to the industry. At the end of the day, it's a phone. We know what phones are. We've seen
Mm.
transparent phones, or phones that have had transparent kind of designs in the past. We've seen phones with RGB lights and lights on the back in the past. Uh, you know, we've seen phones with cool designs. I've said on this podcast many times, I'm a big fan of the Nextbit Robin that launched years and years and years ago. That was then bought out by Razer and turned into the Razer phone. I thought that was really cool, and they even did some cool stuff with the Razer phone being plugged into a laptop, and having that phone. This is all stuff that was done years ago. None of that stuff, even though it was cool, changed the cell phone market. At the end of the day, people want a rectangle that they can tap and get stuff done on. Uh, you know, there's a potential it could be a folding phone. I highly doubt it. So yeah, I don't know. There's nothing really much that they can do, especially since they already released the launcher for the phone, and it's pretty much just a launcher. It's a launcher like we've seen in the past. They've talked about using a Snapdragon processor, so nothing really special or different there. Uh, so yeah, everything that they've shown has been this is going to be a phone, and yeah, I think it's cool that they were able to drum up this much excitement over time, especially for a brand new company. But at the end of the day, I think this has been just far too long of a hype cycle for whatever product they're going to be released. They're going to release. I hope I'm wrong. I hope that it does live up to this year long announcement of announcements. But I don't know if there's going to be a device that is a cell phone that is worth being talked about and teased for a year, with cryptic designs and press conferences about the launcher, and I don't know. It seems like I think they've drank their own Kool-Aid a bit too much. And I hope that after this phone in the future going forward, maybe they settle down a bit, because I'm sure they're going to be relatively successful. Carl Pei has done a good job with OnePlus, and I imagine that although there's probably going to be some growing pains, they're probably going to do really well with Nothing Phone as long as it's priced well, or just looks really cool, or they can tap into that teenage engineering kind of design aesthetic that just really entices people to buy it. But I hope in the future they do settle down and maybe become a little bit more, or uh, less hype motivated for their announcements, and more just, hey, this is the product, let's announce it. Let's not talk about where they're gonna announce it for a year. But what I will say is, even though they're talking about revolutionizing the cell phone market, I doubt that that's going to happen. And if that doesn't happen, I hope what they do is bring things back to the way that they were, in terms of just having features like headphone jacks and big batteries and decent screens and stuff like that, and relatively okay prices. But yeah, I don't know. I really don't know what this thing could be if it is going to be revolutionary. Do you have any idea of like what a cell phone can do that is revolutionary, especially if it's just using parts that we've seen on other phones in the past?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a tough question. I mean, features like you mentioned, headphone jack would be nice, but I think, as I said before, their first product was a wireless earbud, so I doubt that they'll
True, true.
include a headphone jack. Uh, but I don't know, maybe a micro SD card slot would be very nice.
Yeah.
Pretty much, if they could take the Sony Xperia 1 Mark IV and just bring down the price, that would be a great phone for me to see. But I don't know, apart from pricing, maybe repairability. If they, I know they mentioned it a little bit in their press briefings, but saying that it's 100% aluminum for the frame, and part of them designing the phone to be transparent is you're thinking about how it will be handled at the end of life. So maybe the they're designing this phone to be a bit more repairable, easier to recycle, maybe modular, probably not. Other than that, I don't really see how they could shake up the industry. I mean, one thing that they keep on mentioning is that they want to build an ecosystem. So the earbuds, this phone, are the beginning of their ecosystem. I'm trying to think in the future, and I guess the next thing that I see coming in their ecosystem would have to either be a smartwatch
Hmm.
or a smart speaker. And now, if I had to put money on anything, I would say probably a smart speaker, something for your home, to start to build that ecosystem of interconnected devices. If you were nothing, you launch a phone, probably going to be fairly successful. What would your next device be?
Uh, hmm, that's a tough one. I For me, it would be a watch. I would like to see them do a watch, but because so much of their products are based off of like having enough real estate to have a cool design, I think a
Mhm.
smart speaker makes sense. I think they could have something that looks really cool, especially if they carry over that transparent aesthetic. Maybe like uh, take the aesthetic of like a tube amp or something like that, and have it look really cool. Maybe make it out of glass. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that they could do with that transparent aesthetic and their design on something like a smart speaker, because there's just so much real estate to work with. But yeah, I think you're right though. Definitely the ecosystem would probably be the most important thing if they're trying to revolutionize, to make something that rivals Apple. And then they also mentioned Apple a lot. There could be potentially an opportunity to kind of hijack the Apple ecosystem. They talked about how they wanted it to work with things like AirPods out of the box. What if they can find a way to make this phone work with, Apple smart speakers and AirPods and Apple Watch? I highly doubt it, but if there is a way that they can do that, I think that could potentially be a shakeup as well. I just don't see that happening.
So yeah, I guess the only real thing that I think I would be impressed by from their phone is okay, you pack a lot of features in the phone like a micro SD card slot. You have very competitive price, and maybe you throw some AirPods in with it. I
Mhm.
think you give those, then yeah, it would be a pretty exciting launch. But other than that, it's just going to be another Android phone, I think. But hopefully we're wrong. Hopefully our pessimism is ill placed.
And our third topic of the podcast is a new mandatory requirement coming from the European Parliament in the EU, European Union, which will require most electronic devices to use a USB-C port for its charging by the year 2024. So this will include things like smartphones, tablets, e-readers, digital cameras, handheld video game consoles, headphones, which will also affect something like the iPhone. Because as we know, most devices, especially on the Android side, uh, and even stuff outside of that, use USB-C for charging. But iPhones still use their, what is it, Lightning? Their
Lightning, yeah.
Lightning port. Yeah. So, they're one of the holdouts for USB-C. There's also Surface devices that use the Surface connector to charge. But it seems like there is going to be a change coming in the next few years. And that will also require Apple, if they are going to maintain a wired charger on their device, it will need to be USB C. They want essentially for consumers to only have one standard port for charging their devices. Right now, like I said, it's sticking to devices like smartphones and tablets and e-readers and stuff like that. Doesn't include laptops yet, but will eventually include laptops. So that will affect things like Surface going forward. Although I do believe that most laptops that do have other types of charging also have uh, USB C as a backup. So, something like the Surface, you can charge via the Surface connector, and then certain devices you can also charge via USB C. So, I don't think that will be affected too much. Same thing with Apple laptops. But yeah, there's been some conversation about this for a few years. Apple has said that this move would limit innovation and be a downside for customers. But yeah, the EU believes that no, having a standard port across devices is the way to go. How do you feel about this? Do you think that USB-C is as a mandatory standard port across all electronics is a smart thing to do? Do you think Apple is right? Maybe it does limit innovation.
I think it's a very smart thing to do.
Mm,
And I think Apple saying that it limits innovation is just very lazy on their part because they haven't innovated the Lightning port since it came out. Can't
yeah,
remember how long it.
ten
I think maybe
years.
it's been over 10 years,
Yeah.
right? Since it came out. You haven't innovated in a very long time. And the funny thing is, when you look at their more professional devices like the iPad Pros and even like the iPad Air now, they put USB-C on it and they claim all these benefits. This much better, this much faster than Lightning ports and blah blah blah. It was like you admit that Lightning is outdated and it's slow. So why do you continue to put it on your devices, on some of your devices? And why do you even bother saying that it's limited in innovation? Because you're even saying that you're innovating by putting USB-C on things.
Yeah.
So I think it's you know we can't trust Apple to do it on their own. So I think the fact that it's mandated by the European Union is a good thing. And also when you think about how much fuss Apple made about, oh, we're removing chargers from the boxes because we want to reduce e-waste and we want to, well, it would also reduce e-waste if you just made all your devices use the same charger,
Hmm.
right? So that, okay, your MacBooks can use the same charger, your iPad, your iPhone, even your friend's Android phone uses the same charger now, right? So I think if we look just from an eco-friendly standpoint, I think Apple is being forced into doing the actual eco-friendly thing, as opposed to taking chargers out of the box just to sell them back to you later on. Yeah, I don't. I think this is a very good move. I could see the only way that I could see Apple saying, "Hey, this is limited in us," is when you look at something like the MacBook Air, which we just talked about, where they brought MagSafe
Yeah.
to the MacBook Air. Okay, hey, that is something that is truly innovative that you've added back to it. So good on you, Apple. I don't think the European Union is saying that, hey, you have to get rid of MagSafe. They're not saying that at all. And you brought up a good point, as long as Apple has a wired form of charging, they have to use USB-C. So I think a lot of people are saying, and they've been saying for a while, that, oh, Apple's going to get rid of all ports on their phones. This is pushing them towards that. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think, I think we have until 2024 until Apple has to stop shipping phones with Lightning. I still think in 2024 there isn't going to be a portless iPhone, but I don't know. I could be wrong. I hope there isn't. I hope they just put USB-C on it and catch up with the rest of the market. But yeah, I think this is a good thing. Yeah, I don't know. Happy to see it happening.
I think what you mentioned there with the laptop specifically, it makes a lot of sense because, like you mentioned, MagSafe is great. People love MagSafe. A lot of people would prefer that over USB-C charging, but Apple also does allow you to charge via USB-C. So hopefully that's like a way around something like that. And it's same thing with Windows laptops. Some Windows laptops, especially gaming laptops, USB-C port as it stands right now doesn't have the ability to power machines of that power. They need more robust chargers, and I would imagine those would probably be exempt from this as well because USB-C just doesn't meet the specifications to handle those machines. Uh, and also, when it comes to the future of iPhone, I kind of disagree a bit. I do think that Apple would do a wireless phone. I feel like the fact that this has been talked about for so long, I feel like that's the reason why MagSafe exists on the phones, is because it was designed to be a replacement for a physical charger. And the fact that the Lightning port is USB 2, it's a slow port. It's not a very quick port. It's not, fast transfer speeds, especially with what's going on with iCloud now, everything just automatically being backed up to the cloud. I think Apple has kind of trained a lot of users, not all obviously, but a lot of users to stop using that port for data transfer. And especially if you're using like the 5-watt brick or something like that, that most people uh, would have had from beforehand, before fast charging was even available in iPhones. Wireless charging could be just as fast, or not faster than what they're used to. So yeah, I could definitely see in something like the iPhone 16 where it becomes mandatory that they have, which is 2 phones from now, mandatory that they have a USB-C port of them just
15.
saying, well, the thing is, they're saying 2024, right? So the iPhone 14
Hmm.
is going to come out this year.
Yeah.
And then in 2023, it's going to be the iPhone 15. So I would
Yeah, yeah.
imagine that it would be the 16 that where they would really be forced to make that change.
Hmm.
Uh, and the reason why I think that they would probably want to go the route of the portless phone, one, it would make it a lot easier for water resistance, and they could market that in a great way. But two, it just gives them, they don't want to lose that ability to sell all those accessories, those certified Apple accessories, where if they go USB-C, you can go
Hmm.
to Amazon and buy anything. Uh, and I think if they kind of focus the accessory market to MagSafe, they can then control the accessory market once again. What I also think they could do to that is potentially even do what they've done with the iPad and what Surface does with like the Surface connector, how they have those pogo pins on the back of the iPad where you can attach keyboards and stuff to and it can communicate. I could see them also doing something like that on the back of an iPhone so that if you really did need data transfer, you could potentially use that same MagSafe puck, plug it into a computer, and it would use those pogo pins on the back of the iPhone to transfer data if you really needed to. The question though is, would that satisfy the EU? Would they, and this new plan that they have going forward, this requirement, would they say no, you can't do a portless iPhone, or no, you can't do just wireless charging, or you can't do pogo pins on the back for data transfer? I don't think they would get that serious about it, but I don't know. Would you? We've talked about this on the podcast in the past, and you specifically mentioned data transfer as an issue as to why they would still need a port. Do you think if they found a way to do data transfer through MagSafe, through things like Pogo pins, would you be okay with an iPhone that didn't have a physical port on it?
I'm gonna say no,
Mm,
just because is it possible to do? Yeah, I'm sure it's possible, but will it be as efficient?
mm,
Especially Lightning is USB 2. Right now we're up to Thunderbolt ports. If we're talking about someone maybe who's taking a lot of pictures or taking, 8K footage or, 4K footage on their iPhone Pro, it's going to be very slow to transfer over MagSafe if possible, over Pogo pins, compared to plugging a USB-C cord into your phone and into your laptop or computer or whatever device you have, right? And it's if they keep on saying they're for pros, they're for professionals, give them professional tools.
mm.
And it's kind of like, they've admitted that USB-C is better, is faster. Just make the switch already, right? And then you truly can say, hey, we have professional devices. Because like imagine buying I don't know, imagine buying a Mac Pro and it only comes with like USB A Gen 1 ports on it.
Yeah,
Not even HDMI, not even no, not even that. Imagine those old connectors for your keyboard and your mouse.
yeah. Yeah,
Imagine you
string
buy a
connectors.
Mac Pro and it comes with that on it. It's like what the hell is this?
Yeah,
No Bluetooth, no Wi-Fi. You got to plug your modem into your computer. Like technology has advanced, and like you're purposely holding your devices back, and you're holding the customers and consumers back too. So
yeah.
just give us USB C, call it a day. Yeah.
I
And this thing is you can still sell accessories. You can still sell Apple branded accessories, even if you do have USB C just like everyone else. I'm sure there would still be people who make, oh, this is designed specifically for the Apple. And they would
yeah.
have their Apple branded USB C cable, which would be the same as everyone else's, but they would probably charge $20 more, just like they did for their microfiber cloth,
Yeah.
which sold out like as soon as they announce it. So yeah, I don't think they'll lose any money on the accessory market, whether or not they switch to USB C. I think it's just them digging their feet in the sand for a strange reason.
I definitely don't disagree with you. I could just very clearly see the Apple marketing system of a portless phone being like, and it uses MagSafe and it's more reliable and it's more water resistant. And they'll show like a picture of like a nice, cool color matched MagSafe puck alongside a really dingy, broken looking USB-C port and saying, this is better than that. Kind of like what they
Mm-hmm.
did with MagSafe back in the day, or even like the monitors where they showed a Mac Mini next to a PC with like an old CRT monitor and a Mac Mini on like a nice flat screen monitor with the Apple
Yeah.
Cinema display. So yeah, I don't know. I could see them finding a way to sell that to people of like this is the more reliable thing. But yeah, overall, if they do want to play up the Pro lineup, I could see a future. Imagine a Pro phone, an actual Pro phone where maybe it's using an M1 chip or something like that, if they could ever find a way to fit that down into a phone, and has a USB C port like the iPad that is actually USB 4/Thunderbolt. If you're shooting 8K footage, that would be a 100% necessary port for you. Um, so yeah, I could definitely see what you're saying there. Of that being, that's also another way they can market it. Of being like, hey, if you get the Pro phone, you get this super high speed USB C port, so you can transfer all your
Mm-hmm.
nice film footage that you've been shooting on your iPhone to your computer as quickly as possible.
Yeah. I mean, they're already talking about for the iPhone 14. I think it's 14 is supposed to stick with the old chip. The 14 Pros are supposed to be getting a new chip.
Mm-hmm.
They already have the Pro displays on the Pro models. They already have an extra camera on the Pro models. I could very much see them in the future, maybe. Okay, the iPhone 16 has
Mm-hmm.
no ports
Yeah.
at all. You charge via MagSafe. Everything is done via Bluetooth. You know, but our 16 Pro phones get Thunderbolt ports. So, for the real professionals, you can transfer at super high speeds. You can supercharge, fast charging. One thing that I could see them doing, speaking of MagSafe, but not the MagSafe that they have now. It's a cool feature, and I guess it matches the rest of the industry in terms of the inductive charging on the back of the phone.
Mhm.
I think it would be cool, and this is me just buying into the Apple branding and marketing. If they take the same MagSafe charger that's on the 14-inch MacBook Pro, that's on the MacBook Air, and they put that on the bottom of an iPhone,
Mm.
so then it truly is MagSafe. You have the same connector, you have the same clip-in connector. I could see that being something very cool. Probably not the most practical. It's exactly the same as what they have now, except a magnetic
Yeah.
plug-in instead. But you know, I don't know. I think it'd be pretty cool. Be very Apple to see.
Yeah.
But yeah, guess any closing statements?
It's funny. Whatever they decide to do, whether it's the portless phone or USB-C going forward, I it goes back to the conversation that we had so many times about the difference between a regular Apple device and a pro Apple device. Now that the new MacBook Air has a notch, will the MacBook Pros get the new cutouts that the new iPhone Pros are gonna get? It's gonna be interesting to see if like
Oh yeah.
the non-pro machines get that really ridiculous notch, and then the pro machines get the nice new cutouts, and maybe that's something that they do throughout the entire lineup. Is if they don't have an M3 Pro or something like that available in the next couple of years, they could just do that. They'd be like, hey, we replaced the notch with this cool cutout. Now it's a reason for you to buy it.
It's very true. Or you could just not have a notch or cutout in the first place and put the camera in the bezel like a regular company.
No.
Apple. Take it easy, everyone in podcast land.
Catch you in the next episode.